Hi, I'm Tom Eschen, and this is Power in Politics, the award-winning podcast about the issues that are impacting you the most with the people and advocates that are making the decisions and pushing for change. Today we speak with Natasha Pernicka from the Alliance for a Hunger-Free New York. She's the executive director there. She discusses the Big Beautiful Bill Act that just moved to Congress and now is waiting for a vote in the Senate, potentially at that. But she does discuss some of those cuts that are being made to the SNAP benefit program, what that all means, and the ripple effect that could have on New York State residents and also New York State's role in all this as the federal government looks to offset some of those costs to the states themselves. Thanks as always for joining us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts at Power in Politics or watch on YouTube at CBS 6 Albany. Natasha Pernicka joins us now, the executive director of the Alliance for Hunger-Free New York. Thanks so much for coming on with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So the name of this organization, Alliance for a Hunger-Free New York. How long have you been there with now?
Well, we started the Alliance for Hunger-Free New York. We were carrying on the tradition of Hunger Action Network. And back in 2020, at the food pantries for the Capital District, we started recognizing a lot of challenges and started meeting with food pantries from across the state, New York City, Central New York, North Country, and we were all struggling with similar challenges, even though the scale was different. Yeah. So the Alliance for a Hunger-Free New York came out of that as really a way for us to work collectively, share information, and amplify the voice and the information from food pantries.
How have the challenges changed over the course of the last 5 years, would you say, since you started?
Yeah, I mean, working together, we have seen a huge shift of people needing food assistance now more than they ever have before. And it's been really hard. You know, if you look at pre-pandemic to now, we've seen a 25% increase in food expenses, inflation that's not going away. And the distribution of our charitable food system is up substantially. In fact, 70% increase from pre-pandemic times to now. In New York's capital region, they're seeing a historic 42% increase in the number of individuals coming to food pantries. And it's really hard when you're seeing people who are retired, who are just not making ends meet. Maybe they have SNAP. Maybe they're only getting $26 a month. So they're turning to food pantries for their first time. We also have a lot more working people than we've ever seen. Even two-parent households who are working, their money's just not going as far as it used to.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, where you come in to try and help alleviate some of those issues. I guess what are, if you look here in 2025, as we sit here in May, what direction, is it going right now? Where are you seeing the trends, I should say?
I think it's unfortunate because we're kind of stuck in this doing more with less. And we were very disappointed in the New York State budget this year. We had kind of got our hopes up. There are two wonderful programs, Hunger Prevention Nutrition Assistance Program and Nourish New York, that are both state funded, that help food pantries and food banks purchase food so that we can have healthy food, a variety of food, fresh New York State produce and meats and dairy. And unfortunately, the New York State budget was stagnant this year, so that's like doing more with less because food is costing more and there's more people. And then when we're looking at what's happening at a federal level, it's very scary, to say the least, especially when we're looking at SNAP, which is really the nation's best anti-hunger program.
Yeah, let's get into that a bit. The Big Beautiful Bill Act that just passed through the House, going to the Senate. We don't know what it's going to look like maybe after that, but at this point, what does stick out to you when it comes to that? Who is impacted by this the most, by these SNAP benefit cuts?
Sure. We are very, very concerned about the SNAP cuts. Right now, it's looking at around $300 billion over a decade, but it impacts New Yorkers directly. So currently, there are 2.9 million New Yorkers who receive SNAP assistance. It's an incredibly effective program at lifting people out of poverty. The changes to SNAP are shifting the cost from federal to state. So right now, the federal government pays 100% of the benefit, and the state and the federal 50-50 split the administration costs to run the program. The House bill is shifting the burden of the benefit itself onto states, anywhere from 5% to 25% of the impact of the dollar amount. Here in New York State, that would represent about a $1.8 billion cost shift from federal to state starting in 2028 alone. So we're talking huge dollars, and that's important because when I'm talking about the state funding that's supporting food pantries and food banks, we're looking at 57 million, 55 million. Those numbers that they're investing in the food pantries and the charitable system are critically important, but how in the world is the state going to make up for a $1.8 billion shortfall in federal funding?
Why is the administration so valuable in that aspect?
As far as that's the administering the SNAP program.
Yeah.
Well, each state, has to create systems where people can access SNAP, right? So you work in the different counties with all the organizations that help people sign up for SNAP, the EBT cards, working with all the retailers where people can go and purchase groceries. And the other piece that is really detrimental is that they're proposing expanding work requirements, which is really hard, especially for people who are caregivers. They're proposing expanded work requirements, increasing the age of older adults. That would impact over 220,000 older adults at risk of losing SNAP assistance, and also adding work requirements onto households with school-aged children, right? And think about it, a lot of households that would qualify for SNAP are probably would be in a lower wage situation where it might actually be cheaper for them to stay at home with their children than to get a job because of the cost of childcare.
Yeah, the work requirement aspect, the argument you see that the Republicans making is that, well, they're just sitting back at home, and then going out and taking advantage of this system. Do you see any of that, or what do you see when you see people utilizing this?
So every time someone tries to give an argument that there's someone taking advantage of the system, I argue that there is no economic class in our society that doesn't have a few people taking advantage of the system, whether it's wealthy people working the system to get tax breaks, or a lower income mother who finds it cheaper to stay home and care for her children because she can't afford the child care that it would cost for her to go to work, right? So by and large, most people are just trying to survive. They're not sitting there trying to milk the system. And I think that that argument needs to be put to rest. And in fact, when you're looking at a lot of people who have disabilities, it makes it very unrealistic for them to find work. And I really need people to learn about what is a living wage. There's a lot of talk about just buck up and get a job. But guess what? If you're making a low-wage job, you're still not going to be making ends meet. And in fact, United Way just released an updated ALICE report. It's Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed, which shows what is a living wage. What does it take for an individual or a family to have enough resources to make just the basic needs? And honestly, for a family, it's well over $100,000 in income at this point. So I think that we really need to take a realistic look of the cost of living and the expectations that we're putting on people in our community, because they're having to make decisions to just survive and have food on the table.
With that in mind now, you think of these individuals, you mentioned, for example, 220,000 of those seniors, that would be not eligible anymore, not able to get this. What do they do? What happens next if they say, well, I can no longer utilize this program?
This is where, we really have to rally around food pantries. Like, we are that canary in the coal mine in some cases, but also just last ditch like social safety net. And food pantries are largely supported by charity. We're not a government-funded program. We are struggling right now because the FEMA emergency food and shelter funding has been put on pause. So that's yet another source of funding that is not coming to support local food pantries. So really rallying around community, rallying around neighborhood food pantries. My fear is that we're going to end up going back to a you get what you get model. Decades ago, you get a box, you like it, you don't like it, that's okay, just eat it. And we have made so much progress over the past decades to try to improve the dignity of using a food pantry system, doing the best we can, but having a variety of food and produce, culturally appropriate food that people know how to cook and eat. And when you're looking at 1 in 7 New Yorkers experiencing food insecurity, that is a significant part of our population. It's a systemic issue. It's not a failure of character. This has to do with, at the highest level, federal policies and practices and funding that are creating a system where 1 in 7 of our community members aren't getting enough to eat.
We mentioned towards the beginning of this conversation the state's role in all of this and the federal government putting more weight on the state and those funding mechanisms you just mentioned. What can the state do? What do you want the state to do in terms of trying to play their role here?
I think that's a great question. I think the state is going to have to see what happens on a federal level, because if these proposals go through, it's going to be detrimental to millions of people. And, by and large, SNAP is the best way to get people food, because not only can they go to a grocery store and they can choose the foods they're used to eating, but also for every dollar of SNAP benefit that's invested, you see over $1.50 in economic impact. So not only is SNAP helping people put food on the table, it's helping our grocery stores and retail and that supply chain in economic impact. So really, to anyone in federal right now, in Senate, you cannot let the SNAP cuts happen. For state, I think they'll be very concerned to see how this goes. And it's going to be a balancing act between keeping SNAP intact and then making sure food pantries have enough food to stock their shelves so that people can still access it.
For those that can't access it anymore, what advice do you have to them? I mean, I know there's different ways. You've done work with the Schenectady County Food Council in the past of different, community gardens, things like that. Obviously those are maybe Band-Aids, but also maybe things people can do while they kind of figure this out in the meantime, different mechanisms there?
Yeah, for anybody who's watching who's in need of food, there is the Food Connect, New York State Food Connect map at thefoodpantries.org that has food pantries, community meal programs, mobile pantries, and SNAP and WIC sites across the entire state. So if people are needing assistance, that's your best bet. I mean, gardening is fun, and I'm a gardener, but sometimes I have tomatoes, and sometimes it's not a good year for tomatoes. So I think if we're looking at shoring up food security, gardening has its place, but will that make sure we don't go without? That's maybe not the best way. But working in our communities, reaching out to your local food pantries to see what they need, we'll get through this.
Is it frustrating at all? I mean, we make sure we try to tell the whole story here, and you do hear about the Department of Government Efficiency, and like we said earlier in this conversation, people do say, waste, fraud, and abuse. No one wants their taxpayer money spent willy-nilly, I guess, for lack of a better term. But at the same time, you look at the spending this year compared to last, and the spending by our federal government is more than it was last year at this time. So you have these cuts going on, but they're still spending more on whatever else that might be. Is that frustrating at all for because we talk to a lot of nonprofits about this, for people like you to know that, well, a lot of things that I see that are impactful are getting cut, but at the same time, what's this for, right? I guess I'm curious about that.
Look, you cannot make America healthy again if people don't have enough food on the table. That's just a fact. So if your policies are not matching your slogans, then you're not doing what you're intending to do. And food, we know, is one of the biggest social drivers of health. And when you have, as a nation, a significant number of your population can't even afford to put healthy groceries on the table, anything else that you're going to try to tell me about that means you're not sincere in what you're trying to accomplish. And children cannot perform well in school if they don't have an adequate diet. And if you want a great workforce, your workers are not going to be able to concentrate and focus on the job if they don't have enough food to eat. So let's get real and put our policies and our dollars where our mouth is and make sure that people have enough food to eat.
Natasha, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most. Power and politics.